Alright guys, welcome back into the channel. Today I'm bringing you guys a recap of the offseason here in our Pittsburgh Steelers franchise on Madden 21. Now, there's a reason that I am bringing you a recap as opposed to bringing you along throughout the stages of the offseason because, to be quite honest with you, this offseason wasn't very eventful for us, and that's 2 in a row for us, but just simply straightforward speaking, there just was not a lot to cover, and so from that aspect we're going to do this in recap format and bring you guys in here after the first game of the season, which we also played last night whenever we did the offseason. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump into what has changed with the team, some preseason things, roster composition things, all those different good fun aspects. So in terms of the team, we're just going to go from the roster here and take a look position by position. We did have Big Ben Roethlisberger retire for us, so we are going to be starting Trey Lance here, the young superstar quarterback, and trying to develop him as the future starter for the team, backed up by D'Eriq King out of Miami. From halfback, we have James Conner, Anthony McFarland, and Trey Regis. Same halfback composition as before. I think this year, though, we are going to transition to giving the primary amount of carries to Anthony McFarland, so he will be more of the workhorse back, and we're going to be trying to get him to 1,000 yards as opposed to James Conner. With that being said, we did also sign Jalen Samuels and put him at fullback, and this is going to allow us to do a couple of different things. So this gives us a little bit of flexibility. So not only is Derek Watt aging a little bit, but so we'll have another option at fullback if we decide to use that option, but in addition to that, he can also back up at halfback on the depth chart, being a fullback, and he can also back up at tight end on the depth chart. And with that being said, let's go ahead and check out the tight end. So we have Zach Gentry. We also traded for Albert O last season, kind of a low-end trade, really, just to get us a little bit of future depth at the tight end position. There were some question marks for this team in terms of what we were going to do with tight end coming into the season. I want to get both of these guys reps, and Zach Gentry has proven to be very, very good for us so far. But where we were in the draft, we ended up trading away Deontay Johnson, the wide receiver, superstar wide receiver, in order to move up from pick 32 to pick 20. And that allowed us to select Baylor Cupp, tight end out of Texas A&M. Young, hidden dev tight end that is absolutely fantastic. So in the gameplay that I've seen so far, a very good player, and so he's going to get the lion's share of the targets here at tight end. But with that being said, Gentry and Albert O are going to be worked into the offense. I'm going to utilize formation subs a little bit more this year to try and get all 3 of them involved, because I think that they can be really good playmakers from the tight end position. With that being said, let's check out the wide receivers, because we did trade away Deontay Johnson, and we alluded to that possibly happening before. So we're going to be starting Juju Smith-Schuster, Chase Claypool, and Rondell Moore as our 3 wide receivers. Now, we did make a couple moves to kind of bolster our depth at wide receiver. So the 49ers were making quite a few moves, so we decided to trade for Jalen Hurd for a late round pick, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember exactly what we gave up for him, but a young, well, not necessarily young, but 26-year-old star, 72 overall wide receiver. Nothing spectacular, but a player that I've liked quite a bit, that actually attended Baylor. So I like getting that depth there. We obviously maintained Tyrone Ash from last season, a nice athletic young receiver, and then we drafted late in the draft, which I think turned out to be a really good steal, Kamani Lowry out of Navy with 95 speed and 95 acceleration. I had no idea this guy was going to be this good. He only ran like a 4.41 140, but it turned out he had like 95 speed, which is crazy. So fantastic addition there to our wide receivers to round things out. With that being said, let's take a look at our offensive line. Clark Sanders was a draft pick in the 4th or 5th round for us, but our best lineman pick in the draft, and there's a reason for that. A good backup nonetheless. He is injured from preseason. We maintain our other starters. We brought in J.R. Sweezy after the draft to be a backup guard for us, and then we signed Ben Jones. So Marquise Pouncey didn't retire, but we missed our opportunity to franchise tag him because I messed up my re-signing, where I re-signed everybody else and then backed out, but I wanted to tag Pouncey still, so when I came back to it, the option wasn't there to tag him. So we did try to negotiate with Pouncey, but he ended up signing with Washington in the offseason. So we ended up going and getting Ben Jones, a very good veteran center to replace him. We were a little worried about what was going to happen with the center position, but I'm okay with Ben Jones for now. I was going to potentially draft a center in the first round, but we decided to forego that because we picked up Ben Jones, and we decided to pick up that tight end. We brought in J.C. Hassenauer, who has been on the Steelers roster before as a backup center. We brought in Rich Frost as a backup right guard, and then we brought in Mitch Core as a backup right tackle. So not much happening there with the starters. They're pretty much the same aside from losing Pouncey, which is a bit of a hit to the offensive line. That does stink quite a bit. Moving on to the defense here, we moved Isaiah Buggs to left end to back up Stephon Tuitt. At right end, we did make what I would consider to be a blockbuster trade, but not something that I was necessarily pursuing, but something that just was offered in our league. The Vikings were trying to move on from some of their aging players. I don't even know if you could consider Danielle Hunter an aging defensive end, but he really wasn't having a ton of production there in Minnesota, so he was offered up. So we ended up swapping Bud Dupree and a second or third round draft pick for Danielle Hunter, which I think we won that deal, but I think that we should be able to get a lot of production out of Danielle Hunter as an edge rusher, which is really good. And this replaces J.J. Watt, who is obviously walking in free agency, as we had discussed before. Zach Allen's going to be backing him up at right end. And then at the D-tackle position, we made a really big pickup, in my opinion, in Harrison Phillips. I like this pickup a lot. This is a player that I've been trying to get off the Bills for a while, but he ended up sitting there in free agency, and I said, okay, well, let's add him. He's a good run stuffer. This is the type of backup defensive lineman that I'm looking for. He's going to back up every single position on my D-line because he's got good strength, good block shed, and half-decent power moves. He's a really good run stuffer, and that's all I'm looking for in a backup defensive lineman at this point. And I think that he's a very consistent player, somebody that I've used a lot before. And then we also signed 24-year-old Miles Brown, who's a similar type of player, a guy that's a decent run stuffer, good strength, good block shed, should be able to help us out on the depth of our defensive line, which is where we had a lot of injuries last year. With that being said, moving on to the linebackers, nothing changed here with TJ Watt backed up by Gabe White. The middle linebacker position pretty much stays the same from last year. I don't know if I showed you guys these pickups of Cash Maluia and Noah Dawkins at the end of the season last year, but we found these guys on the practice squads late last season, and we decided to add them to the roster. And I'm really excited about Cash Maluia, particularly because he kind of reminds me a bit of a Troy Polamalu, but very athletic, good players to back up Devin Bush and Ulysses Gilbert. At the right outside linebacker position, Alex Highsmith is going to be getting the start this year because of obviously Bud Dupree leaving, and he's going to be backed up by Sutton Smith, who we did inevitably decide to bring back for one more season. At the cornerback position, we had a little bit of turnover. So Joe Hayden walked away. That was kind of a mutual thing. So Joe Hayden was getting past his prime, and his speed really dropped to like 86, which really isn't serviceable at that point. And so we decided to kind of mutually part ways, and we're going to be starting Steven Nelson and Justin Lane on the outside. So two very solid corners, one of them being really, really good in Steven Nelson in the franchise. We ended up picking up Isaiah Oliver, although he's not going to play slot for us. The slot corner, the third corner, is going to be TJ Carter, who was the rookie that we drafted last year. Young guy with hidden dev, or star dev, I guess, at this point. So the top three corners are Nelson, Lane, and Carter. We ended up bringing Isaiah Oliver in late in free agency just as a depth option, a 25-year-old with star. So I like that pickup a lot as a depth option. At the very least, he'll be a solid backup safety and a solid backup slot corner and things like that. So I like that addition. And then we drafted this, I think we signed him. I don't think we drafted Joe Minor, a 66 overall corner out of Texas, just to have a little bit more depth as well. At the free safety position, we have Minka backed up by Jared Stern again. We decided to bring him back for one more season in free agency, and then we have Terrell Edmonds backed up by Antoine Brooks Jr. Now, at punter, we are maintaining Tim Elam, who we drafted last year, but a very interesting turn of events had us trading away our kicker during the draft. And so what ended up happening was around the 5th round or so, let me check to see when exactly this player was drafted. this really good kicker fell to us. Drafted in the 4th round. So this really good kicker fell. He was projected as like a 2nd or 3rd round pick, and I was like, man, I've been looking to move on from Chris Boswell for a while. Not because Chris Boswell is bad, but just because he's costing me so much money and he's getting older. So we drafted this guy, and it turned out that he was really good whenever we took a look at him for the first time, and I said, okay, well, guys, can I trade Chris Boswell away? So we traded Chris Boswell away to the Texans, who did not have a kicker. We traded him to the Texans for a 7th round pick, just to add a little bit of depth to our draft, because we didn't have enough picks to draft enough backups, and so we were able to get who we wanted that way. So that's the team composition for this season. I'll show you guys the team tab real quick, just so that you guys can get a good idea of how everything looks lined up next to each other. So this is how the offense looks this season. And actually, Patterson should be left guard and DeCastro right guard, but that's how things are stacking up at the moment. And then on the defensive side of the ball, you guys can see here we have a lot of good players on defense still. One of the things that I think is worth noting is that we should start to transition away from some of the older players on the D-line. So this year with my first pick, I was considering taking one of the top DNs to just try to develop behind Tuitt or Hayward, somebody that was a very similar style of player, but I decided to go with the tight end option because that was more of an immediate need in comparison to the defensive ends. But for the future, I think that it is certainly a position that we're going to want to continue to address, which is the defensive line, just to prepare, because Cam Hayward's getting up there in age, Tuitt's getting up there in age. Danielle Hunter is 27, so we have some time left with him, but we could potentially start to see some issues here on the D-line if we are not prepared for the future. So that's how things look with the team. That's how things have shaken out. A couple of other interesting notes is during the preseason, I believe we won out all of our games. We obviously didn't play them, but we simulated them. So let me go ahead to my team schedule for you guys real quick. During the preseason, we won out all 4 games pretty substantially, to be honest with you guys. We beat the football team, the Raiders, the Dolphins, and the Buccaneers. Won all four games, so that might give us a little bit of momentum going into the regular season. And we decided that night, once we had our roster said and done, we were going to play the Browns. And this game turned out to be a pretty interesting game for our team. There were a lot of highs and lows for our young players. So you guys will immediately notice Trey Lance. So Trey Lance threw the ball a lot. He had 436 yards. He had 3 touchdowns, but he had 5 interceptions. And I don't really know what to credit those 5 interceptions to. It could be a difference of going from Ben Roethlisberger to a Trey Lance and just not being comfortable with Trey Lance yet. But in the same breath, I feel like the Browns defense just made some fantastic plays, and they really didn't drop the ball when it came to them in comparison to my defense, who dropped the ball quite a few times. But with that being said, McFarland shined in his debut as the starting running back with 131 yards. He had a really long touchdown run. He did fumble once, so that is an issue to keep our eyes on. In the receiving game, as I had mentioned, Baylor Cupp looked really good, and not only did he look really good as a receiver, making really good combat catches and things like that, but he looked fantastic as a blocker. I mean, on the Anthony McFarland long touchdown run, which was like 80 yards, Baylor Cupp was blocking like 20 yards downfield, and he was just plowing people over, and that is something that, in my personal opinion, can't be overstated. But even so, Zach Gentry got onto the field quite a few times and had 3 receptions for 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. So, like I said, I want to keep using all of these tight ends, even though we drafted Baylor Cupp, because look at that production. I mean, you can't argue with that. That's just fantastic production. Juju Smith-Schuster continued to shine. He's been our star for how long now? One player that I will say struggled a little bit, actually, was Rondale Moore. Rondale Moore, when I threw him the ball, it was tough for him to go up and get it or anything like that, so we have to utilize him carefully, because he can't really jump and get high point catches or combat catches or anything like that, and that complicates things a little bit because he is a little short and whatnot. So something that we have to adjust to, and I think that's part of the problem. Is I tried to throw him the ball a lot, and a lot of those times those were the interceptions that we threw, because I was thinking, well, I'm used to throwing to Claypool, Juju Smith-Schuster. They can go up and get the ball, or at least attempt attempt to get it, whereas Rondale Moore can't necessarily do that. With that being said, our offensive line did struggle a little bit in terms of giving up pressure. We were pressured a lot during this game, even though we only gave up one technical sack per our offensive lineman Spencer Brown here, but we were under pressure consistently. So I think that the loss of Pouncey is certainly showing its effects already, but it is something that is a little bit of a fluid situation, and we'll want to monitor that as we continue to go forward. Ulysses Gilbert continues to look very nice on the defensive side of the ball. And one of the players that on the stat sheet doesn't look fantastic, Alex Highsmith with his 2 tackles, played out of his mind in my opinion, because there were many times where he was in the backfield pressuring the quarterback, getting tackles, in my opinion, that should have been in the backfield, but Nick Chubb is just so good that he can always pick up yards off of his carries. Alex Highsmith looked really good, and that is something that I'm excited for. Like I said, the stat sheet doesn't show it, but he's a player that looked fantastic for us. In that game, we ended up getting a sack out of Cam Hayward, and that was it. I will say that Daniil Hunter also looked really, really, really good. He kept getting pressure on Sam Ehlinger and forcing him to throw bad passes and things like that, and that resulted in positive plays for our defense. We should have had a few more sacks, but we just didn't connect all the way at the end. He was really good at getting rid of the ball, but good signs for us moving forward. Terrell Edmonds, and Steven Nelson are the players that came away with picks, so really no surprises there. Again, and I don't think we forced any fumbles or anything like that. So kind of a quiet day defensively, realistically, even though we didn't really give up a lot of points. And then the rookie kicker did make 2 of 2 field goals and 3 of 3 extra points in his debut, so that was a good outcome from him. And then on the kick return, Rondale Moore averaged 30 yards. He was doing really well on those kick returns, getting us a couple of extra yards and things like that. So a lot of ups and downs, I would say. We did have those 5 interceptions, but in the same breath, I feel like the team just played really well, and we came away with a 35-19 win regardless of those interceptions. And anytime that you can turn the ball over that many times and still win by that type of a margin, that says something about how good your team is overall. And so that is one of the things that I really enjoy seeing. Now, a couple of storylines coming from this this draft and this offseason and things like that. The Chargers, I don't know why, but the Bills were unable to re-sign Tremaine Edmonds, and so the superstar young middle linebacker went to the Chargers. That was a big difference. The Titans were unable to attend the draft, so they got pretty unlucky with their draft. The Panthers had the first overall pick and elected not to go for the quarterback that we all thought they were going to draft, Howell. Howell ended up getting drafted to the Chargers, actually. They ended up taking them later on down the line, and so the Panthers came away with like the 4th quarterback in the draft, and he will, I believe he will succeed under this player, because this player is very good, if not the best in the league. But this was not the ideal situation for the Panthers, getting Jaden Daniels out of Arizona State. Jaden Daniels is a solid player, but certainly one that we need to keep an eye on as we move forward. With that being said, I don't think there were too many other storylines to watch out for. There were some other things, but I'll keep you guys posted as we go through the franchise. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the recap, and hopefully you guys look forward to seeing more from this season. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys have a good night.